Today, we're going to talk about something that's very important with regards to manifestation and Neville Goddard's teaching, and it's the concept of the Sabbath state. Now, if you're someone who's been on this journey with me for a while, you know how much I talk about this concept and how important it is to me. What makes this so relevant is that this is mentioned in the very Bible we've been reading all our lives, yet we've skipped this part because it didn't make much sense when it came to practical value. We never looked at it from this angle, from this light of using it to our own advantage, and Neville Goddard does an amazing job of adding practical value to this seemingly abstract idea. But most importantly, Sabbath state explains the idea of letting go and all of its nuances. The idea of letting go, being in the wish fulfilled, thinking from the end, are all intricately linked with one another, yet they are also so different from each other. When we go back to the source, that is the original text, and we see how the writers have explained these concepts, we'll see that there are very fine lines separating these ideas, yet in failing to acknowledge these minute differences, these ideas are often interchangeably used, and as a consequence they are grossly watered down and lost in translation. And so we're going to debunk some of these ideas. Now, in my personal journey, when I've aimed towards attaining the Sabbath state, or the state of mental rest, as Neville Goddard puts it, I've found better results than if I were to solely focus on my desires and engage in different practices. Now, there's this common idea that the more we practice, the more we affirm, the more we persist, the faster our manifestations come into being. But this isn't entirely the case, because it doesn't take into account the different personalities and how easily we can detach. Now, some of us can easily persist, can affirm and be okay with and get our desires, but for the rest of us who have this obsessive personality, it's better to veer towards the Sabbath state and focusing on letting go. And so it's not like there's one size fits all solution to manifestation. So what is Sabbath? Sabbath is essentially embodying the feeling of it is done. It is a sense of knowing, a feeling of calm, and a lack of obsession over a desire. It's that moment when you realize that even if you don't have your desire, you will still be okay. In other words, it's a state of being at peace with where you are in life. So this is what letting go is in the truest sense. It's not trying to overcompensate by accepting defeat per se, but rather it is being okay with not having it. There's a huge difference between being okay with not having something and aiming for not having something. And that's what is so difficult for us to accept, because it's very ego shattering that manifestation is supposed to deliver results, not give us a consolation prize of some sort, or give us the exact opposite of it, right? But that isn't the case. So the idea of accepting where you are is something that we often forget, and this to do with your manifestation. Your manifestation can be anything, whether it's money or love or any other material stuff. Acceptance is a very subtle form, is a very subtle emotion. Now, the Sabbath state is a biblical concept. It is fundamentally found in the Bible. However, there are lots of teachers of metaphysics who talk about the feeling of being at peace, and they use this term. For example, Neville Goddard's idea is most relevant, which we commonly discuss. Neville said the following: the Sabbath is the mental rest which follows the fixed psychological state. It is the result of your 6 days of work. The Sabbath was made for man. Mark chapter 2 verse 27. This mental rest which follows a successful conscious impregnation is a period of mental pregnancy, a period which is made for the purpose of incubating the manifestation. It was made for the manifestation. The manifestation was not made for it. This is the most important line, this quote. So the Sabbath state was made for manifestation. The manifestation was not made for it. So the manifestation is not a consequence of you attaining the Sabbath state or the state of mental rest, but rather the Sabbath state is a consequence of manifestation, which means it is essentially an alternative to the signs follow, they do not precede. So when we look at manifestation, when we try to attain Sabbath state in order to manifest our desires, we are missing the point. So Sabbath state is attained when we accept our current reality instead of focusing on our specific desires, which is ever changing. Charles Fillmore, in his book Metaphysical Bible, said that the Sabbath is a consciousness that we have fulfilled the divine law in both thought and act. The Sabbath of the Lord has nothing to do with any day of the week. God did not make days and weeks, nor has he darkened his clear concepts of truth by the time element. time is an invention of man. The Sabbath is a very certain, definite thing. It is a state of mind that man enters or acquires when he goes into the silence of his own soul, into the realm of spirit. There he finds true rest and peace. The seventh day means the seventh or perfect stage of one's spiritual unfoldment. Man had become so lost in the darkness of sense consciousness that he could not save himself. So a Savior came. When man lays hold of the indwelling Christ, the Savior, he is raised out of Adam consciousness into the Christ consciousness. He then enters the seventh stage of his unfoldment where he finds rest and peace. So essentially, attaining the Sabbath is considered to be expansion of consciousness, and Neville says the same thing. Like in my previous video, I explained the book At Your Command by Neville Goddard, and he keeps saying this thing that it's not that Adam or Christ are different entities but different levels of consciousness. So to continue, the Sabbath can be enjoyed at any hour. Man shows his ignorance and limits his happiness by confining the Sabbath to one of the days of the week. He should learn to read the Bible in the spirit and pay less attention to the letter of it. The Sabbath as an institution was established by man. God does not rest from his works every seventh day, and there is no evidence that there ever has been a moment's cessation in the activity of the universe. Those who stickle most for Sabbath day observance are met on every hand by the evidence of perpetual activity on the part of him whom they claim to champion. So let me repeat this part. The Sabbath can be enjoyed at any hour. Man shows his ignorance and limits his happiness by confining the Sabbath to any one of the days of the week. He should learn to read the Bible in the spirit and pay less attention to the letter of it. So what Charles is saying here is that the concept of Sunday is something that is constructed by man, and this idea that we should only enjoy on Sundays or the seventh day and limit our happiness to this day is a construct and a consequence of us reading the Bible all too literally instead of reading in between the lines or reading in the spirit, as he says. Now Neville says the same thing, that the Bible is an allegory, it is a metaphor, and these concepts or these people in the Bible are personifications of abstract ideas. Now let me continue with this passage by Charles. The Sabbath as an institution was established by man. God does not rest from his work every seventh day, and there is no evidence that there ever has been a moment's cessation in the activity of the universe. So this thing is that we should not limit our happiness to the seventh day or segregate this happiness, so it's not like a routine, right? So now this brings us to the end of Charles Fillmore's quote from the book Metaphysical Bible, and now I'll continue with my discussion. Now, to get to the Sabbath state is a process. Even though it's a state, it's a constant process that we must embrace. There's a bridge of incidents that leads to it. Now, if you're not familiar with what bridge of incidents is, it's this chain of three-dimensional events that happens in a reality that ultimately leads us to our desires. So it's like a justification of a manifestation, right? A three-dimensional justification for manifestation that is justified by the concept of time. Even though time is an illusion, in our 3D reality we experience time, and there must be justification as to how a manifestation came into being. And so bridge of incidents is something that makes the manifestation logical, and it is, in science we call causality, but this is something that makes sense to us only in retrospect. In my experience, these incidents usually involve a transformation of our doubts and inner self-talk into confidence and surety. The key to achieving the Sabbath state is to let go of the guilt associated with our desires. Guilt is the biggest blockage to Sabbath, and most of our work is about dissolving this guilt. Now, guilt is a strange concept to throw around in this regard because it seems rare. Oh, is guilt relevant? When we are asking for it, we can have low self-concept, low self-esteem. But what really is guilt? You see that sometimes at the back of our mind, we often feel guilty to ask for seemingly big things. And I say big within quotes because there's no such thing as a big manifestation. But guilt is the most subtle and the biggest blockage to Sabbath. It is what destroys our internal peace and often interferes with us accepting our present moment. So for example, this hustle culture where we're supposed to work every single second of our existence, right? It doesn't really allow us, it doesn't really preach rest. And so say you have this idea inside your head that you're supposed to work 24/7 and then you're taking a break, there will be this slight guilt operating at the back of your mind. And so the idea is to transcend that and through inner self-talk and transform these little doubts into confidence and surety. One of the most important markers of the Sabbath state is calmness. It isn't happiness, it isn't exhilaration, it is rather a calmness, which if you can visualize it like a graph, but very stable ones, not where there aren't too many ups and downs. When you are in the Sabbath state, you feel a sense of peace and tranquility. You're not constantly thinking about your desire and you're not worrying about what the future holds. You're simply living in the present moment. And Alan Watts says something very important when it comes to the idea of present moment, that if you are looking for the present moment, you are not really in the present moment. It's almost as if the only way you can really calibrate to the present moment is through meditation, when you're tapping into the void. The void meditation is something that Dr. Joe Dispenza also talks about, and those meditations are based on that concept. But you can't really capture a present moment, so it's something that's tangible, but rather when you're doing something, when you're lost, when you're in this flow state, right? So that's what we call being in the present moment, being in the flow state, where time seems to just slip away, right? We aren't worried about anything. We aren't worried about our future or whether or not our manifestations come to fruition. Another marker of the Sabbath state is a lack of want to obsess over your desire. It's like you find it almost unnecessary to obsess over your desire. This isn't a consequence of knowing that obsession might harm your desire. So you might have read somewhere that obsession kills your desire and you are really afraid to be obsessed. It's not like that. It's more of almost you feel exhausted. You feel that obsessing over your desire is absolutely unnecessary. Like you have better things to do than obsess over your desire. You're no longer consumed by the thought of what you want. You're not constantly thinking about how you can get it. Instead, you're content with where you are in life and you're not driven by the need to have more. So the need is a very important word. You can want more. You can occasionally look and have ambitions, have desires, have goals, but whenever you look at it, it comes from a place of inspiration and happiness. And that isn't necessarily something that is more than what you have right now, right? So where we look at motivational videos, there's almost this stark contrast between our present reality and the reality we are trying to manifest, right? Our present reality is horrible relative to what we want, but when you're in the Sabbath state, it's like you're happy right now and you're also happy. So it's like if you were to relatively measure your desire with respect to your present moment, they're almost the same. It's like your desire is just slightly different from where you are, and this is something that's quite difficult to wrap your head around. But feeling that even if you don't have your desire, you'll still be okay is another marker of the Sabbath state. When you are in this state, you know that you don't need your desire to be happy. You understand that happiness comes from within and that your desires are just means to an end. Fearlessness, confidence, and the dissolving of guilt are also markers of the Sabbath state. When you're in this state, you're not afraid of what the future holds. You're confident in yourself and your abilities, and you're free from the guilt that comes with wanting something. So happiness is not something that you are trying to extract from the achievement, from the fulfillment of your desires, but rather you're using your desire as something that's optional and your source of your happiness, and you're relying on internal source of your happiness. In my experience, now I endeavor more to attain the Sabbath state than the desire itself. Once the Sabbath state is attained, the rest becomes insignificant, which means it's not a want anymore, which means it's a have. When you're in the Sabbath state, you're at peace with yourself and with the world. You're content with where you are in life, and you're not constantly striving for something more. We have this idea that in order to get more, you have to be discontent, constantly striving with where you are right now. It's almost like there's this programming that if you are happy, you're too happy, you should be guilty, but that's not the case. That is in fact quite the opposite. And so guilt, like I said earlier, this fact that you might be happy today, it might make you guilty if you misread, misunderstand some of traditional motivational ideas, which are, frankly speaking, grossly oversimplified. But it's important to understand the entire picture. When you are content with where you are in life, you're not striving, you're not fighting an uphill battle. So you are creating this environment, you're allowing your manifestations to flow, you're allowing your subconscious to take over. In fact, if you look at some events in your past, you'll notice that more often than not, when you were overthinking, right, when you were in this fight or flight response, you were often interfering with the natural flow. You know how when you're nervous, you are trying to think of the right words to say or the right things to do, but it's almost paradoxical, because instead of trusting, instead of really allowing things to flow, you're now blocking the very thing. It's paradoxical, like Alan Watts said in one of Peaches, that love is a subtle feeling. If you love, it's totally possible to love something or someone too much. Like a little girl who, in order to express her love for a pet rabbit, strangles her to death with all her love. So that's what happens when you're overthinking. There's this illusion that you're actually working, you're all speeding up the process, but you're actually interfering with it. Now, how do we get to the Sabbath state? We've discussed all these ideas, these concepts of what it is, but how do we get there? To simply put, it is really about dealing with our cravings and attachment to anything. Cravings are an intense longing for something, and it's something that we all experience at some point in our lives, whether it's food, material possession, or relationships. We all have desires that we yearn for. However, it's not just the desire itself that creates the craving, but it's the attachment we have to it. So desiring itself is not something that hampers our manifestation, but it's the craving. It's this idea that if we don't have it, we are doomed. It's the attachment we have to it. Attachment is the connection we form with our desires. It's the unhealthy connection, and it's what makes us crave something. If there's a connection between you and a desire, it means that it's not yours yet. You would not crave what you already possess. The more attached you are to your desire, the more you crave it. So if there's a connection between you and your desire, it means you already have it. But if you crave it, it often implies the opposite. Now, even though craving implies more of this wanting, you can think of it as over desiring something, but this implies that you don't have it yet. Also, why would you want it so bad? But here's the thing though, attachment is just an illusion, and it's something that you create in your own mind. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't indulge in your desires, but you should do it believing that it's already yours. Over time, you may grow indifferent to it, and it won't be a necessity anymore. Letting go, attachment is simply removing the connection you have with your desire. You can still choose to indulge in it if you wish, but you won't be attached to it, and that's the key. Now, connection is something that is, and by connection, what I mean here is that it's not the connection in a positive sense, but connection in a sense of desperation. The idea is to remove the connection and tune into the feeling of indulgence. Now, indulgence often implies that something is optional, right? You aren't reliant on your indulgence. Rather, indulgences are luxury, and not in a sense of putting them on a pedestal, but you don't need them to sustain yourself. The real point is that how you exactly get there is different for everyone. What works best for one person may not work for another. Some people find that imagining their desire is enough, while others need to feel it real. For some people, imagining seems fake. If you visualize something, it automatically doesn't create that emotional glue with your mind. So you need to artificially create that emotional glue, because some of us are generally more, I wouldn't say apathetic, but less emotionally responsive to situations. Some may find that forgetting about it is the best way to let go of attachment, while others find that feeling gratitude every now and then is the way to go. Now, I don't like mentioning some of mental health stuff, but say you have this internal struggle with OCD of some sort where you can't really get rid of some thoughts, right? It's better for you to veer towards the feeling of gratitude and focusing on what you already have, rather than bringing to mind what you want, because that might create these little triggers, right? For personally, I find that feeling gratitude every now and then works best for me, right? Even if I don't experience those emotions, sometimes I just write a sentence, even if I just type it out, but just a sentence acknowledging something that I already have, just to calibrate my senses that what I have. Now, I'm not saying that when you acknowledge something that you have, you're gonna feel joy, you're gonna jump up and down, but just writing that down, it creates a significant shift in the sense that it pushes you over the tipping point, right? The real deal is always with you, and you're the one who knows what works best for you. In conclusion, the Sabbath state is a marker that have elevated yourself to the level of your desire. It is a state of being at peace with yourself and with the world. We elevate ourselves to a desire because we expand in consciousness, right? In physical reality, in 3D reality, even if our five senses tell us that it has not yet come come to fruition. We are expanding our consciousness beyond the limited capabilities of our five senses so as to include the desire. And so we are elevating ourselves and our consciousness to the level of our desires. To get to this state, you need to let go of the guilt associated with your desires and transform your doubts and inner self-talk into confidence and surety. The guilt also includes these meta paradigm that if you're happy right now, you're doing something wrong and you're bound to fail. We must get rid of that as well. When you're in the Sabbath state, you're no longer driven by the need to have more. You're content with where you are in life. Thank you for watching the video. Now there's so much more that can be said in this regard, but I'll leave it for another video. Stay tuned.